Good evening, I'm Diana Skaya, and you're watching World News Tonight, live from Warsaw. Donald Trump ramps up attacks on Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, falsely claiming that Ukraine started the war and mirroring Russian propaganda. Now, more on that in just a moment, but first, let's take a look at tonight's headlines. 8 Ukrainian children returned, but 19,000 still missing in Russian forced deportations. Poles reject the EU's migration pact. Now, will Poland face EU punishment? And a 98-year-old Holocaust survivor, Marian Turski, dies. U.S. President Donald Trump called his Ukrainian counterpart Volodymyr Zelenskyy a dictator without elections. He also said that Zelenskyy has done a terrible job running Ukraine. Now, in a post on his social media platform, TruthSocial, Donald Trump referred to Zelenskyy as a moderately successful comedian who, according to Trump, convinced the United States to spend $350 billion on a war that could never be won. Trump also claimed that Washington has contributed $200 billion more than Europe without any guarantee of repayment. He further stated that Zelenskyy admitted half of the U.S. aid was missing and criticized the Ukrainian president for refusing to hold elections, citing his low approval ratings in opinion polls. General Envoy Kellogg, the U.S. Special Envoy for Ukraine and Russia under President Donald Trump, arrived in Kyiv today. Now, upon landing, he stressed that his priority would be to listen to the Ukrainian authorities' stance on a potential peace agreement with Russia. We go live now to our correspondent who is in Kyiv, Donald Arleth. Don, good evening, coming to us live from there. Now, what can we expect from General Kellogg's visit? What are the updates?
Well, I think you summed it up. That's at least what he told reporters when he arrived here in Kyiv earlier this morning, that he was here to listen. He was here to listen to the government authorities. He was here to listen to the Ukrainians' point of view. President Zelenskyy encouraging him to go out and see the city, go out and see Kyiv, see the damage from all the airstrikes, from the attempt to take over the capital 3 years ago. Go to Bucha, go to Borodenka, go to some of the other villages that were destroyed and see the damage. Now, Envoy Kellogg has been here before, and so he very well knows what Ukraine needs, what Ukraine desires. He also said that the Ukraine shouldn't worry about the fact that the United States is going to force some types of peace agreement upon them. Of course, these are very comforting words here in Kyiv because, as you just mentioned in that previous report, the narratives that are going around are so preposterous that, well, it has people here on edge for sure. But let's just listen to what Envoy Kellogg told reporters when he arrived here in the capital earlier this morning.
It's good to be back in Kyiv again. Going to have some wonderful talks with President Zelenskyy, his staff, and military commanders. You know, it's kind of nice that I'm here just a few days before the third anniversary of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Gives a chance to have some good, substantial talks. We had a chance to see President Zelenskyy and his team down in Munich. So I think this is going to be a continuation. Looking forward to doing it. And appreciate you all being out here. We understand the need for security guarantees. It's very clear to us the importance of sovereignty of this nation, the independence of this nation as well. And we're going to, part of my mission is to sit and listen and say, okay, what are your concerns? What are you asking? We can go back to the United States, talk to President Trump, and with Secretary Rubio and the rest of the team, and just ensure that we get this one right.
Don, I mean, what's interesting here is that we just heard Kellogg say that it's interesting that I'm here almost on the third anniversary of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. But now Trump recently took to social media that Ukraine started the war, echoing Russian propaganda and the Russian narrative. Now, what's Zelenskyy's response?
That's right. Lots of accusations, both from that social media post and, of course, what he told reporters last night, that Ukraine started this war somehow. President Zelenskyy, I think, is very much in shock. I think we've seen a bit of frustration come out from him. And, of course, he addressed these claims today, and he did so very diplomatically, I might add, and many people's opinion. Of course, there are other voices out here that are outraged. So let's go ahead and listen to what President Zelenskyy, how he maneuvered this very strange situation, if you will.
My approval rating today as president is 57%. I've heard upwards of 57 in various public opinion polls. If someone wants to replace me right now, that's not going to work right now. And another thing, we're talking about a supposed 4% approval rating. We've seen this disinformation, and we understand that it comes from Russia. We understand that, and we have evidence that these numbers are being discussed between America and Russia. We have great respect for President Trump as the leader of the people who elected him. We have great respect for the American people who constantly support us. But unfortunately, they live in this disinformation space. And the question should not be what kind of support I have. What matters are the ratings we pay attention to. The number one question today is how to protect ourselves from shelling. I think that is number one. I think, and I know, that this is the number one issue for Ukrainians.
Don, what can you tell us about what Ukrainians are saying, on the streets about these preliminary peace talks, for instance, that took place in Saudi Arabia without a seat for Ukrainians on the table?
Right. Well, I listen to a lot of different voices, some people of which are informed about Saudi Arabia, about what's going on, about what Donald Trump has said. And so they're able to give an opinion. And I've also talked to people that aren't quite as aware of it. So we had a range of opinions, if you will, from I think some very moderate voices. You'd hear more like that peace agreement would be good. Of course, the country's tired. They're having problems manning the front lines. Of course, the supplies are dwindling. And it's really hard, 3 years of war. But then there are other voices that are very stubborn and say no, that this is, no peace is better than an unjust peace. And so, well, you can hear it for yourself.
I think that Trump, of course, he don't think about Ukraine. He think about his country. That's normal. But like for me, like for Ukrainians, it's a problem. So I don't like this situation, honestly. But end of war, of course, it's perfect situation. I want to see end of war.
We will never forgive and never forget. How can you imagine this? We are losing people every day. It's just not only about territories. It's about that we've lost so much. And we've been struggling not only for physical things, for territories, we've been struggling for independence, for democracy, for some principles, which the world just do not care about now. They're caring just about money. So give us money back, take your money back. But no peace, it's impossible. For me, it's impossible. I will struggle till the end if needed.
Well, Don, that's right. A lot of frustration there that we are hearing amongst these Ukrainians. Thank you so much for your report coming to us live from Kyiv, and do stay safe. EU ambassadors approved a proposal this morning to impose tougher sanctions on Russia. The new restrictions include a ban on Russian aluminum imports into the EU and targeting additional vessels linked to the Kremlin's shadow fleet. Now, while the move still requires final approval from foreign ministers on Monday, it's already been praised by key officials. Our EU correspondent, Angela Skujins, has this report.
News that the EU is one step closer to slapping Russia with more sanctions has been welcomed here in Brussels. The sanctions package was approved by ambassadors in the morning today. The package includes identifying additional vessels suspected of being a part of Russia's murky shadow fleet. These are vessels that are circumventing the EU's surveillance rules and bringing in profit to the Kremlin via the sale of oil. The package also includes revoking at least least 8 broadcasting licenses from operations in the Russian Union. It also, for the first time, bans the import of Russian aluminium. This has been previously floated but never got over the line due to member states' fears that it could hurt the European economy. Polish Foreign Minister Radek Sikorski was in European Parliament today fronting a Foreign Affairs Committee, and he told reporters that he welcomed the news of the sanctions package as well as new military aid being delivered to Ukraine. Here is what he had to say.
What I hope we will unveil on the anniversary is the 16th package of sanctions that was provisionally agreed by Coreper this morning. As to support for Ukraine, we should do it, but I don't know about the dates.
But this is not the end of the line for the sanctions package. It requires a final tick of approval from foreign ministers who will meet in Brussels on Monday. But it's coincided to be on the same day as Russia's ongoing invasion of Ukraine, that hitting the 3rd year anniversary. The College of Commissioners will visit Ukraine next week as well to mark that somber anniversary. But these discussions are going ahead while the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio suggested that the EU should ease up on some of its sanctions on Russia as part of those ceasefire negotiations. But we'll wait and see what Washington has to say regarding these restrictions and more sanctions. Angela Skujins from Brussels for TVP World.
This week, 8 Ukrainian children have been returned home following their forceful deportation by the Russian military forces. But the same, though, cannot be said about the over 19,000 who are still missing. And all of them are subjected to Russification. Zuzana Jurek reports.
In 2022, Russia launched not only its full-scale invasion of Ukrainian territory, but also the operation of destroying the very fabric of the Ukrainian society. Children have not been spared, being subjected to forceful deportations and subsequently the Kremlin's propaganda machine.
They're telling stories, school children, that only Russia has a huge power, only in Russia you can have a future, and the West is a failed state.
The NGO Save Ukraine identified that approximately 20,000 Ukrainian children have been kidnapped by the Russian forces since February 2022. Together with the 8 children returned this week, close to 600 have been repatriated to date.
It's thousands of Ukrainian children who disappeared from new occupied territories, Donbass, Crimea. It's only official number 20,000, but we have no idea how many still stay in Russian captivity.
The Ukrainian children are subjected to re-education measures aimed at divorcing them from their national identity. This includes replacing Ukrainian with Russian as the primary language and teaching pro-Russian history.
The purpose of targeting children in this particular case, if we take sort of the broader view, is partly in order to demonstrate power towards the Ukrainians from the Russian side. So it is a way to try and break Ukrainian morale. If we're talking about the broader Ukrainian society.
On March 17, 2023, the International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for Russian President Vladimir Putin and Maria Alexeyevna Lvova-Belova, the Russian Presidential Commissioner for Children's Rights. According to the warrant, there are reasonable grounds to believe that President Putin was directly responsible for the forceful removal of children, which constitutes an act of genocide under the Geneva Convention.
For something to count as a genocide, it's important to understand that it is not necessary for the perpetrator to destroy an entire population or even get close to it. The intent has to be there to destroy that population's specificity, be that demographic, but also, for instance, cultural.
This process has been a part of Kremlin's war machine since at least 2014. Following the illegal annexation of Crimea, observers close to the situation were reporting that Russia began transporting the peninsula's children into its territory.
Many of them grew up in the Russian regime, and they've been brainwashed and hugely indoctrinated, were recruited to Russian army. And now 1,000 young adults who've been Ukrainian school children in Donbass and Crimea fighting as the Russian soldiers.
The Kremlin stepped up its forcible transportation of children into Russian territories prior to the full-scale invasion in February 2022. Children removed by the airspace forces were then falsely listed as Russian nationals on children placement lists and given to Russian families for adoption.
Today in Brussels, we had women, Ukrainian women, who've been taken to Russian prisons, and their children were tortured before their eyes. It's horrible stories what Ukrainian children experience.
And successful repatriations of children are proving a challenge.
Ukrainian children in occupied territories in Russia, we lost a lot of them because Russia changed their names, last names, date of birth.
With over 19,000 children still missing and the war soon to enter its fourth year, the challenges of bringing Ukrainian kids back are more poignant and time-sensitive than ever. For TVP World, I'm Zuzanna Jurek.
The vast majority of Poles are against taking in migrants under the EU migration pact. That's according to the latest opinion poll on the issue. Now, Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk has said on multiple occasions that Poland has no intention of implementing the pact. Now, is Poland going to be punished by the EU for not applying these new rules? Well, Kazimierz Łysiak reports.
Migration has been one of the more hotly discussed topics across Europe, especially during elections. And it is no different when it comes to Poland, which is heading to a presidential election in May. According to the latest survey for RMF-FM, as many as 75% of Poles are against taking in migrants. Only 20% are for it, and just 5% are undecided. Europe still has no unified policy on how to deal with migration, and this is being exploited by the far-right populist parties.
Our public opinion, our society has fear of migrants, and we have an information, there was spread an information that we will have to pay for each migrant in European Union, which is partly true.
Paying for each unaccepted migrant from the quota is one of the three ways an EU member state could opt out of the relocation scheme under the Migration Pact. A scheme aimed at relieving countries such as Germany, Italy, Greece, France and Spain, which took in the most migrants since 2015. But top Polish officials argue Poland has already welcomed millions of Ukrainian war refugees since 2022, so it shouldn't bear any additional burdens.
Poland will not implement the migration pact in a way that would result in additional migrant quotas of any kind in Poland. We have shouldered more than anyone thought was even possible just a few years ago.
Poland is also spending more than 2 billion euros on protecting its eastern border with Belarus. The regime of Alexander Lukashenko has been sending waves of illegal migrants to that border in an effort to destabilize both Poland and the EU. TVP World reached out to the Polish government and asked whether these circumstances could indeed exempt Poland from any additional costs of the Migration Pact.
We're in a close dialogue with the European Commission on the solutions for migration management, which include the amendments to the legal framework applicable since June 2026 under the Pact on Migration and Asylum.
These changes could be proposed as early as March at the upcoming European Leaders Summit in Brussels. As Poland is heading to the presidential election in May, no candidate has so far backed the Migration Pact. The leading candidate of the ruling center-liberal coalition, Rafał Trzaskowski, says Poland should be exempt from the pact. This could leave the conservative and far-right opposition with one argument less ahead of the vote. Kazimierz Łysiak, TVP World.
Holocaust survivor and journalist Marian Turski has passed away. Now, he was a propagator of Polish, German, Jewish reconciliation and a defender of the oppressed and minorities whose voice was well known and respected worldwide. Ovidiusz Nicea reports.
Marian Turski warned that the modern world should not be indifferent to evil. He survived Auschwitz, and it was there that 5 years ago Turski gave this, perhaps his best-known speech.
Do not be indifferent when you see the past being stretched to suit current political needs. He warned us to not ignore even the smallest acts of force, intolerance or hate. Because if we do, it will create a snowball effect that will simply wipe us out.
Turski was a historian and a co-founder of the Museum of the History of Polish Jews in Warsaw. The institution continues the mission that the Holocaust survivor outlined.
He was like an advocate for Polish-Jewish reconciliation, for Polish-Jewish-German reconciliation, and this mission is very important for us.
Turski worked as a journalist and published until his last days.
Marian was undoubtedly one of the oldest journalists and reporters in the press world. He was continuously the director of History of Politica almost 70 years, from 1958.
The small office where Turski would spend hours now stands empty. It's full of books, which symbolize his curiosity of the world, and tremendous knowledge, which inspired many all around the world.
He was an authority on a global scale, authority for royals, for presidents, for politicians, for officials. A very important person, and as I said, very modest and humble.
At the end of January, Marian Turski attended the anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. Despite bad health, he wanted to be there to amplify the message of never again. For TVP World, Ovidiusz Nicieja.
Już nie ma.
As we approach the 3-year anniversary of the war in Ukraine, the global spotlight continues to shine on this ongoing conflict. Now, with recent developments, including U.S.-Russia talks in Saudi Arabia, Europe's defense package for Ukraine, and controversial statements from President Trump, tensions remain high. Now, joining me now to discuss all of this is Wojciech Przybylski, the editor-in-chief of Visegrad Insight Respublika Foundation. Wojciech, welcome to the program. Thanks for being with us here.
Thanks for having me. Hello.
Let's talk about here first with Keith Kellogg's visit in Ukraine today. I mean, he emphasized that the United States recognizes the importance of security guarantees for Ukraine. What do you think this means for the future of the prospect of these peace talks, if that's what we can call them, between Russia and Ukraine?
Well, that's definitely a lifeline to hold on to from the perspective of Europe, from the perspective of Ukraine. To see this is continuously the key U.S. policy that guarantees independence from the aggression of Russia. The trouble with that is that it's one man against many other words coming from the U.S. administration that sometimes raise serious doubts about the intentions coming from the top of the White House.
How did we even get here, Wojtek, that suddenly all these talks that happened in these last few days, Munich Security Conference, Paris, Saudi Arabia, how did we even get here if we even look at, Trump's comments that he took to social media, essentially blaming Ukraine for everything and blaming Russia for absolutely nothing?
Well, we know that, as Mr. Zelenskyy has put it, there is a lot of disinformation bubble around Mr. Trump. And that Mr. Trump, oftentimes in the past and very recently, has been not relying on the credible news, but rather willing to speculate, to go after different hoax theories. So these are definitely the dangerous moments because of the influence such information can take on his decisions. And at the same time, back to Mr. Kellogg, there are hopefully enough people in the U.S. administration, and we know that there are many in the U.S. Congress and overall in the U.S. society that support the westward orientation of Ukraine and, on the other hand, American support for the future of free and whole Europe, which is the big promise not of centuries old, but just decades old Republican administration.
What do you think Ukraine expects from Kellogg's visit, especially after Saudi Arabia?
Well, a sense of clarity, a sense of options that are being considered from the US, and importantly, a strong element of communication, internal communication built on trust. And I think Mr. Kellogg tries hard to provide that, to be meaningful. At the same time, everybody knows that he might be equally important mediator for Ukraine and Russia as much as between Ukraine and the White House top decision makers.
Wojciech, let's talk about this adoption of the 16th package of EU sanctions. What do we know about this?
Well, we know that Hungary is extremely happy. It's communicating that they see it as their success, but it is nevertheless an adoption of a continuous policy of the EU to take harder positions on Russia, to continue limiting Russian strategic options, sanctioning the assets that allow Russia to profit even from the fight, to be anchored in the European economic space. So that's also why Mr. Domański, Minister of Finance of Poland, has declared that is a success. Well, the truth will be seen only in the years to come. Sanctions never take immediate results. We have not seen any immediate results coming from sanctions policy. But what we can say for sure is that it is a good thing. Europe stays united on this key foreign policy agenda that is saying who is the bad guys, who are the bad guys, who we want to punish and seclude from the space that we control, and why do we do it? Because we support Ukraine.
Poland's defense minister said that the country will not send troops to Ukraine despite being a NATO member and neighbor. How do you interpret this decision? What do you think it means for NATO's eastern flank security?
Yeah, I don't know why would we say despite being NATO member. Because we are a NATO member, I'm Polish, we are having already 10% of our troops committed to protecting NATO borders in a situation where these borders are being violated by the special forces of Belarus with support of Russia in sponsoring illegal border crossing that may lead to further incursions, military incursions. So what Poland is doing is already committing in the eastern flank, the critical element of NATO's geography, the personnel, which is only building up in Poland, and we are really increasing the number of troops in Poland. So that's one thing that has to be said. There are two other considerations we need to see. Now, Poland is known to be building up its military, but the key element is the dynamics. We are only growing up, and the troops that have been recruited, that have joined the ranks of professional army service and different other parts of the military service, are now getting the training which is necessary to be fully operational and use the full potential of the military purchases that are being made at the same time. So we are increasing the potential in the critical geographical space, geopolitical space, in which these two elements, just seeing, looking at the numbers, require time, require continuous investment, and require the strategic reserve also on, when we talk about the Baltics, on the direction to secure our key NATO allies. At the same time, Poland is providing logistical support for everyone else in NATO that has more spare, more room to maneuver with the troops to deploy to Ukraine, to deliver the munition, to deploy equipment to Ukraine. And Poland is welcoming all the partners' help in doing so, because that in joint action is guaranteeing the key success. And last point on that, we have to remember that we are being used again in a disinformation war by Russia. Already in 2014, Russian propaganda was trying to give an impression that Poland's support for Ukraine is dictated by some neo-colonial motives. So they are basically projecting their own impressions on Poland regarding the space that once historically indeed was controlled by Poland. Poland is very reluctant to enter into this geography, not to allow Russia, first of all, to fuel further propaganda and allow for potential provocations, acts of sabotage that would sow division between Poland and Ukraine, which would have dramatic consequences, again, for the whole Western alliance in supporting Ukraine, limiting the options on the ground, and that we cannot allow.
Thank you so much, Wojciech Przybylski, Editor-in-Chief of Visegrad Insight, for being with us here on World News Tonight.
Thank you for having me.
And that completes this edition of World News Tonight here on TVP World. I'm Diana Skaya. Thanks for watching.